lecture. My name is Michael Kay. I teach law at Washburn Law School in Topeka, and I'm a citizen member of the Dorothy L. Thompson Committee, which is a group of community members, staff, and faculty here at the university that every year selects people to be honored in Dorothy L. Thompson's name. This year, I feel we are especially honored by having Judge Paul L. Brady as our speaker. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him and about the lecture series and about Dorothy Thompson. The Dorothy Thompson Civil Rights Lecture Series is sponsored by the Office of the Provost and co-sponsored by a number of university departments, colleges, and administrative offices. And they are listed in the program which you received this evening when you entered. There are also a number of people who are subscribers to the program as patrons, and you'll see their names also in the brochure on the lecture series. I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of our sponsors and patrons for their generous support and encourage you, if you are so inclined, to add your financial support if possible. I think personally, especially with Judge Brady here tonight, that it's extremely important that people in this community, especially students, hear from people of color, people who have stood up for equality and have made that their life mission, something that meant a lot to Dorothy Thompson. It's from these people that we learn the most in life. We learn far more from them, really, than we learn in our classes, and I say that as a faculty member myself. If you can support this in any way, in any small way, I urge you to do so. Let me say a few words to you about Dorothy Thompson. Dorothy's widowed husband is here with us tonight. Dorothy and her husband Chuck came to Manhattan in 1965 when Chuck joined the Department of Psychology. And a few years later, Dorothy became a part-time instructor in the Department of English. In 1971, Dorothy joined a group of professional women on campus who submitted a report entitled The Status of Women at Kansas State University, 1970 and 71. It is an interesting report to be read even today, and helps us consider the impact that it had on the university community, including the creation of the Commission on the Status of Women and the Office of Affirmative Action. And I'm proud to say that my wife, Susana Valdivinos, a lawyer, is a member of that office and has worked there for several years now. Dorothy Thompson served as the first affirmative action officer at Kansas State University and later as our associate university attorney. She helped draft the Kansas State policy prohibiting sexual harassment, prohibiting racial harassment, and the policy prohibiting sexual violence. Although these policies have been revised over the years, she still has left a strong mark on the current versions. Dorothy Thompson was a passionate advocate for civil rights, and this lecture series is a tribute to her memory. She also went to Washburn Law School, as did Judge Brady. She graduated from Washburn Law School before I came on the faculty, but I'm really sorry that I never got a chance to meet her. Now let me tell you something about Judge Paul Brady. Judge Paul Brady was born in Flint, Michigan, and is a 1956 graduate of the Washburn University School of Law. There's something about Paul Brady that's very unique, and I'd ask you to think about this. He was the first African American ever appointed a federal administrative law judge. This, being the first of anything, is an unusual experience. You have to think about that. Because when you're the first of something, what you are, you're the only something. You're the first, perhaps, of your group that became something. And if you're black and you're the first of something, I think you carry a double burden of establishing who you are. Judge Brady, throughout his life, has distinguished himself, not just by being first, but by being first and being very good at it, and being concerned about everybody else who came behind him. He served 31 years for the federal government, including 25 years as a judge on the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, and he was the first judge of that agency's Atlanta regional office. He served in the U.S. Navy and he was a boxer. And boxing left an influence on his life. He's a wonderful man. He was the commencement speaker at Washburn last year when I first met him. And our dean met him before that. And each person from our school, each faculty member who met Judge Brady said, we've got to have him come back here. Judge Brady, interestingly enough, developed an early interest in the law as a result of his personal involvement in Brown versus the Board of Education. He was coming here from Michigan, passing through, and his aunt, a very strong-willed woman named Lucinda Todd, who had initiated the Brown case when she was unable to get music education for her daughter in the city's segregated black schools, asked Judge Brady, he was then just Paul Brady, to stay and stay in Topeka, and he did, and he went to law school here. And he's the kind of man who, during that 1954 era, when all this was going on, had the temerity to tell the faculty at Washburn Law School that they hadn't stood up for the Brown plaintiffs. And I think that was characteristic of what Judge Brady is like. He is a kind man, a gentleman, but he also speaks his mind. Judge Brady abandoned a career in psychology. He had worked at Menninger's as an aide and had a strong interest in psychology. He knew Carl Menninger very well, and he abandoned it after being inspired by a small group of dedicated people who met and developed his aunt's case at her home. Think about what that meant to him. Judge Brady is now retired, but after Washburn Law School, he went to Chicago, where he spent 11 years in private practice. In 1968, he became the first African-American attorney employed by the Federal Power Commission. He received the commission's highest award for outstanding performance. Later, he received nationwide recognition for his efforts in organizing government lawyers to assist in the Washington, D.C. Volunteer Neighborhood Legal Services Program. Among other honors, he was an initial inductee in that program in 1991 in the Alumni Hall of Fame of Flint, Michigan Central High School, his alma mater, and last year he was our commencement speaker. He's been the first a lot in his life, and he deserves it. Judge Brady is a lifetime member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He is the author of a book, A Certain Blindness, which is a book chronicling his family's history as typical of the efforts of other African American families to participate in the pursuit of America's democratic vision. And he includes in the book a story of a man, his great uncle, his uncle, Bass Reeves, and he's now written and completed a book about Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was a former slave, appointed as a U.S. Deputy Marshal in 1875. He was the first black federal officer to serve on the Western frontier. It just seems that firsts follow Judge Brady wherever he goes. Judge Brady recently accepted Bass Reeves' posthumous induction as the first African American in the Great Westerners Hall of Fame, Hall of the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. Judge Brady has two children, Paul Brady Jr., an officer in the LA Police Department, and Dr. Kathleen Brady of Bethesda, Maryland. And he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife Zernona. And Zernona Brady is well known as one of the people closest to Martin Luther King Jr. and one of the people who was a major organizer of the March on Washington. She's very well known herself. And Judge Brady will deliver this spring's lecture, and it's called The Twoness in America, Black and American. And the title is drawn from an essay by W.E.B. Du Bois from the collection The Souls of Black Folk. And the talk will focus on Judge Brady's life and his experiences with civil rights and race issues. Judge Brady told me that one of the things that means much to him is what the effect of slavery has been on the generations that have come since the era of slavery, and how that can best be eradicated. Tonight, Judge Brady will talk for about 20 minutes, and then he will take questions, which is the way he prefers to speak about these things. And when we're done with the program, those of you who care to remain are more than welcome to join us for an informal conversation. So it's with great honor and privilege that I would like to introduce to you Judge Paul L. Brady.
Thank you very much, Professor Kay. He spoke so glowingly about me. I don't know now whether I should proceed or leave it at that. But I thank you. And I want to thank the committee that's responsible for my being here, those members of the Dorothy L. Thompson Lecture Series Committee, and others who have contributed so much to making everything very comfortable for me here today. It is indeed an honor to be a participant in the Dorothy L. Thompson Civil Rights Lecture Series, yes, Civil Rights Lecture Series. I'm not exactly a stranger to Kansas State. Attending Washburn many years ago, I used to come to our sports events here and have known some of the outstanding athletes and friends of past years. But on the other hand, I can't say that I'm that familiar because it's been about 50 years now. But it's nice to be back. Over 100 years ago, scholar, educator W. Du Bois wrote about his life of Twoness, an American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled stirrings, two warring ideals in one dark body. I want to share with you some of my experiences in the struggle to reconcile the unjust burden of color with the promise of America. A perspective I hope will help create better understanding among Americans, black and white. The artificial distinction of color inequality has been contrary to the American ideal from the beginning. The Founding Fathers, in all of their wisdom, believed that somehow the two antagonistic principles of freedom and liberty for some people, slavery and subjugation for others, could be united in the same land. Perhaps my own family history illustrates this painful contradiction. I'm the great-grandson of a white slave owner and the grandson of black slaves. For me, like America, the frustration and confusion with color has been part of my life from the beginning. The official record of my birth identifies me as a white male. Nothing in my early life, however, indicated the Twoness of which Dr. Du Bois spoke. In the area where I lived, all of my friends were white, and there's nothing in my day-to-day life to indicate to me I was any different from my friends, or that certainly in no less because of my color. Even though my experience with full equality was short-lived, it strongly influenced my life. But it was of a very short period. As Professor Kay indicated, I was born in Flint, Michigan, where my parents had migrated following World War I, seeking opportunities offered by the fledgling automobile industry. One of 5 children, our upbringing emphasized strict moral values, Bible reading, discipline, good manners. Attending Sunday school was a must, and we proudly displayed the flag on national holidays. At home and in school, I learned the importance of being a good citizen, beginning with deep respect for the law. Patriotism was ingrained, and each day began with the Pledge of Allegiance. I recall how proud I was to recite the cherished principles of the Declaration of Independence and the stirring words of the Gettysburg Address. My teachers seemed generally interested and were fair without any prejudice whatsoever. They taught us to emulate our regional heroes like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Walter Chrysler, because in America we could be all we would want to be through hard work and individual effort. I, of course, was unaware of the hardships that my parents had faced, including the fact that my father's employment was limited to a factory's foundry, working under conditions that eventually led directly to his death. I was 10 years old. As I grew older, I learned more and more about the Twoness of America. My mother, a former school teacher, taught us about the experiences of black people which were not included in our school textbooks. History books, of course, were filled with inspiring stories of Revolutionary War heroes in their courageous fight for freedom. But there was no mention that many, including George Washington and Patrick Henry, were slave owners who'd actually denied the same freedom they sought to others. So I began to learn of two histories, one highly cherished and proudly recognized, and one mostly denied and hardly revealed. My mother also made us aware of the accomplishments of black men and women in the making of America. Particularly outstanding were those who started their lives as slaves, yet contributed greatly to the cause of freedom and justice. Included was our own great-uncle, Bass Reeves, who Professor Kay had mentioned. As a deputy U.S. Marshal, he served heroically on the western frontier for 32 years. Uncle Bass compiled an unparalleled record in Western law enforcement, but is not mentioned in any of our history of the West. By junior high school, my teachers pursued a policy which seemed like benign neglect to me. Though I might have been classified as a promising student, they offered no support or expressed no personal interest in me as they expressed for my classmates. I recall specifically on two occasions being advised not to take a college preparatory program that I had planned, but to follow an industrial arts program and learn a trade. This was a touchy subject with my mother. We had always stressed the importance of learning and preparing ourselves to be the best that we can be. By the time I reached high school, World War II was underway and military service appeared a certainty. But I also faced a dilemma. While I wanted to do my part, I was not willing to accept the humiliation and abuse that was being heaped on my brother and other black servicemen. They were housed in segregated areas, provided facilities inferior to their white counterparts. Their opportunities were limited, and even prisoners of war were granted privileges not accorded to our own fighting men. Off base, prisoners of war could go places where a black serviceman's mere presence would result in immediate arrest. Such was the state of Twoness in America as it fought a war to protect freedom and democracy abroad. Shortly before finishing high school, the Navy announced it was abolishing its policy of segregated training and assignments. Filled with great hope, I looked forward to serving with pride. Upon graduation, I enlisted with the promise of attending a machinist school. Contrary to the new policy, however, I was denied machinist training and told the only school available to me was in the Stewart's branch. This is where black sailors were previously assigned to serve officers and maintain their living quarters. I, of course, refused. Being the only black recruit in my company of 150 men in boot camp, was no particular problems for me, and I became a squad leader. At the end of our training, we earned a day off to visit historic Williamsburg, Virginia, which was nearby. We were excited about the prospect of enjoying a favorite meal, shopping for gifts and souvenirs. On the morning of the trip, I was called before an officer who informed me that as a Negro, I could not be served in the shops and restaurants of Williamsburg. Needless to say, I did not go on the trip to Williamsburg that day. A short time later, I was assigned a ship in Norfolk, Virginia. On one occasion, after a visit to the segregated USO in town, I decided to take a streetcar downtown and remain aboard, assuring myself a seat on its return to the naval station. As we approached the downtown section, 2 police officers came aboard and asked me where I was going. After I explained what I planned to do, they said they supposed it would be all right this time if I did not get off, as niggers are not allowed downtown after 10 p.m. In time, as I became more vocal about racial unfairness, I did not consider my vulnerability and the price I would pay for such openness. Before my enlistment was over, I was convicted in a court-martial for an offense that I did not commit. Still in my teens, I learned an entirely different meaning of justice and the rule of law. That to respect and obey the law was no assurance of its protection, since the legal process could be manipulated to prosecute and punish the innocent. I also learned that the Navy's inducement to serve with pride and dignity and the offer of opportunity was nothing more than a hoax, especially after the Navy itself admitted that I had no chance. In the words of poet Langston Hughes, America was not America to me. Returning home, still determined to seek a better life and advance myself, I was accepted for training in engineering at the General Motors Technical Institute in my hometown of Flint. When I appeared for enrollment and orientation, I was flatly told there obviously had been a mistake, as I could not be admitted because of my color. It mattered not that I had met the entrance requirement, was a veteran, and my family, through hard sacrifice, saving, had owned stock in General Motors. Bitterly disappointed, but not to be deterred, I obtained employment in a new diesel plant in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad was converting many of its engines from steam to diesel. I had experience with diesel generators and small craft engines in the Navy. Several weeks after I commenced employment, the company advised me that I could not continue to work in the engine service department. It was explained that this period of transition had resulted in the displacement of certain employees in West Virginia. The company, they said, faced the potential threat of strike by hiring new employees for jobs without first granting seniority preference. The company official acknowledged that I was better qualified and possessed more experience than those displaced, and that no one had actually exercised the right of seniority preference. In any case, I felt a sense of total defeat. In one instance, I could not be accepted in the school where engineering was taught due to its racially exclusionary policy. In the other, I could not receive training in an employed capacity because a union with a history of racial discrimination objected. In neither case was consideration given to my intelligence, determination, ability to learn, or other aspects of my worthiness. Filled with despair, I accepted work as a janitor and considered my future. Deciding on a new life in California, I took advantage of the discounted employee fare for the trip. En route, I stopped in Topeka to visit relatives, as Professor Kay had indicated. And knowing it was a low point in my life, and believing no good would come from my move to California, my aunt and uncle began a strong campaign for me to move to Topeka and enroll in Washburn. When I totally prepared to give up, I was persuaded to seek higher formal education. I never finished that trip to California, and years later, my aunt remarked, if Paul had gone to California, he might have gone the wrong way. And she added, this was the turning point. And indeed it was. And I will always be grateful for what she had done for me at that time in my life. When I arrived in Topeka, my aunt Lucinda Todd, who Professor Kay referred to, was engaged in her personal fight against discrimination in the public schools there. She realized her daughter Nancy had a talent for music. She took piano lessons, but she wanted to learn to play the violin. She inquired whether music instruction was provided in the schools. She was informed that such instruction was provided in the white schools, but not in the black schools, because black folks did not want music instruction for their children. She took her case to the school board and won. Nancy, of course, participated in the program and eventually earned a degree in music from the University of Kansas. I might add that I had another cousin who was a very proud graduate of Kansas State. I had learned today that John Slaughter, had been recently honored by this university. But many times I heard him refer to how important it was to get his college education here at Kansas State. He went on to become chairman of the National Science Foundation and eventually the chancellor of the University of Maryland. So I have cousins in both of the schools. Following her personal victory, my aunt helped spearhead an attack against discriminatory policies throughout the Topeka school system. The school case in Topeka began through the efforts of a small but determined group that met in my aunt's home. She and Nancy were the first to step forward as plaintiffs in the legal action that became the Brown case in Topeka. In commemorating the 35th anniversary of Brown, an editorial in the Topeka Capital Journal began, and I quote, "At Lucinda Todd's dining room table, a strategic decision was made that literally rewrote a section of the United States Constitution." My aunt later gave me that table, and it is now on exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. I sat in on most of those early meetings. I'm highly impressed with the dedication of the small group. I joined their cause. Being part of an effort to right such a terrible wrong, I was inspired to become a lawyer. Lingering, of course, in my mind, was a painful experience I had with the law less than 3 years before. I was in law school when the decision in Brown was handed down. It was a time of great joy and elation, a new day. The future appeared bright with the concept of equality as a self-evident truth written into law. I joined with the NAACP and others in adopting the motto, "Free by 63." We sincerely believed that all vestiges of racial discrimination would be wiped out in America by the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. We mistakenly assumed, however, that with the outlawing of legally enforced segregation of the races, respect for the law, American values, and a sense of fair play would prevail over the practice of racial discrimination. In the aftermath of Brown, in spite of bitter hostility and open defiance to the law in some parts of the country, the federal government did make a serious effort to achieve racial equality. There was talk of a rebirth of America, the Second Reconstruction. Civil rights legislation, Supreme Court decisions, and other measures were taken to fully ensure the equality of black citizens whose basic rights had been denied for generations. With part of the focus on employment discrimination, the government's own policies were exposed. The Federal Power Commission, as well as many other regulatory agencies and some departments of government, had never employed any black attorneys or any black professionals for that matter. Thus, with my appointment as attorney for the Federal Power Commission, I was a direct beneficiary of the government's commitment and provided the chance to reap privileges and benefits previously reserved for white Americans. I remain grateful to all those who helped change America to make that opportunity possible. Unfortunately, any semblance of a second Reconstruction soon began to fade. The government, including the Supreme Court, began a shift away from the promise of Brown and the lofty goal of full equality. By the 1980s, the government appeared to be in full retreat. The executive branch sought to overrule a Supreme Court decision denying tax exemptions to schools that discriminated on the basis of race. There was evidence that even the Justice Department itself moved to undermine civil rights laws. The Secretary of Education at the time stated the Justice Department was determined to weaken civil rights enforcement. During this period, some 40 years after my non-visit to Williamsburg, Virginia, I returned to attend a judicial conference. Of course, they can now be served in the finest restaurants in all of the stores and restaurants. Reflecting on the vast changes in America and in my own life, I realized, however, some things had remained the same. Just as I was the lone black sailor in boot camp, the only black attorney at the Federal Power Commission, I was the only black judge attending that conference in Williamsburg. The distance, lack of understanding between black and white Americans prompted me at that time to write A Certain Blindness. The title was taken from a lecture by William James entitled A Certain Blindness in Human Beings. Professor James spoke of the inability of some persons to consider the feelings, values, and worthiness of others. For my purposes, I showed that most Americans of various backgrounds have consistently failed to see African Americans as they see themselves, but are seen as somehow less worthy and not fully entitled to the promise of America. Unfortunately, America has never gotten past its history of slavery, which has left an indelible mark on our society. Unfortunately, this includes our system of justice. When I was sworn in as a federal judge, I recall that nearly 100 years before, my great-uncle Bass Reeves was sworn in as a United States Deputy Marshal in the Indian Territory, the area that later became the state of Oklahoma. While we both dedicated our lives to serving the rule of law, I was ironically now placed in a position to determine the rights of persons under the same constitution and framework of laws that allowed for him to be declared chattel property with no rights whatsoever. During the days following my swearing in, I reflected on the effect of race and color on my family's relation to the law. While our family has suffered many racial injustices, we remain steadfast in our faith in America and the rule of law. In fact, we've had somewhat of an impact on the American legal system. While I served to interpret the law, my Uncle Bass served to enforce the law, and my Aunt Lucinda Todd helped to change an unjust law. Uncle Bass took great pride in courageously upholding the law in the violent and lawless land of Indian Territory. Knowing the law was responsible for his freedom and assured him full equality, he devoted his life to serving justice under the law. From the lowly status of a slave, he arose to become in many instances the federal government's highest legal representative. Tragically, the cruel and unjust laws that condemned him to slavery returned to haunt him in his final days. By the time Oklahoma entered the Union, laws were in place to separate Americans by color and restrict the constitutional rights of black citizens. In some ways, Uncle Bass and I shared a similar experience with the rule of law, and history repeated itself. Just as he had great faith in the new Constitution, with equal rights guaranteed, I believed in the promise of Brown, the new beginning for America, and the final end to the exclusion, separation, and Twoness we had known. But during the past 50 years, consistent with history, laws, court decisions, and other measures tended to assure equality have been circumvented or diluted by lax enforcement. In 1956, a lawsuit was filed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on the simple plea of black children to enroll, enter, attend classes, and receive instruction in public schools on a non-segregated, non-discriminatory basis. A final decree was entered in that case 49 years later. Truly, justice delayed is justice denied. Equal education was, of course, at the heart of the Brown decision. The Supreme Court recognized the importance of providing educational opportunities at an early age to increase the prospects for all children to reach their fullest potential and lead productive, successful lives. But despite the specific ruling of the Supreme Court, the decision has become so eroded that unequal education is presently allowed to exist in our public schools. A return to the application of laws that have been so effective in the past to disadvantage black citizens. A perpetuation of the unreasonable notion that application of equal standards to persons in unequal positions somehow yields equal justice. Most well-intentioned Americans, based on myth, stereotypes, reflect various attitudes and perspectives that continue to portray black citizens as less worthy. In the 1990s, after publication of A Certain Blindness, my views were confirmed. The National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago reported that 51% of Americans believed that black Americans were less patriotic than other Americans. This simply means that most Americans will not see that black Americans have fought heroically in all of our nation's wars, the highest service that can be performed for one's country. What more could be expected of citizens? The report was personally very disheartening for me because my family had maintained an unwavering faith in America despite extreme suffering due to our nation's shortcomings. But our bitter disappointments never passed on to affect our children. I'm very pleased to tell you that my son proudly served in the United States Marines, and that he is on leave now from the Los Angeles Police Department and serving in Iraq. While all of our nation's former enemies with immigrants from other countries are welcome to our shores, Black Americans continue to be singled out and told that they must wait for complete and total acceptance in the only land they have ever known. This past December, Duke University reported that 40 years after the baby boom, Black Americans born between 1946 and 1964 are no better off relative to whites than their parents and grandparents in terms of income. Last week, the National Journal of Health Affairs reported that middle-aged Black men are dying at nearly twice the rate of white men of similar age. The report went on to show that this reflected lower incomes, poorer access to health care. Even though slavery itself has been roundly condemned, America refuses to confront its legacy of racial discrimination and racial privilege. 2 years ago, traveling in Africa, our president spoke of slavery, and I quote, as one of the greatest crimes of history. He expressed an awareness and understanding of its harmful legacy in stating, and I quote, the bigotry fed by slavery did not end with slavery or with segregation. But the president has not used the enormous power and influence of his office in an effort to remove this terrible blight from our society, and it continues to breed racial injustice. Until we finally break the continuing cycle of white superiority, Black inferiority, America will never be true to itself. Only then can we finish creating one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Beautiful speech.
You think so? Thank you. Thank you.
See if there's some questions.
Yes. Oh, yes. I would like that.
That'd be great.
Okay.
There's still a lot to be said, and if you have questions, Judge Brady will be willing to answer them. Just raise your hand, stand up, and we'll talk.
Yes, sir.
I was watching the news the other day on like CNN or whatever, and they were talking about how maybe Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton might run for office in the 2008 election. They weren't like really serious, but it was thrown out there a few days ago, and they were talking about it. And I was just wondering if you think that maybe in my lifetime or our generation or something, we'd see an African American president, or is this country ready for that yet, or are we far away from that?
Well, I think that perhaps a woman, Ms. Rice, at this stage, they're talking in terms of she and Ms. Clinton, Senator Clinton. For me, it's your lifetime, perhaps, a doubt in mine. There's a great deal of talk. People express high and lofty ideals, good intentions, but somehow we don't get around to doing what is fair and just and right. Of course, we have to also think in terms of having someone that has the background, experience, and is prepared to do a job and is worthy of that office. Yes, sir. Any others? Yes, ma'am.
What do you think about, like, a couple years ago, there was talk about repayment to, you talk about the history of slavery and the crimes being done to ancestors of Black Americans. Like what in Germany, what happened, like the survivors of the Holocaust got paid
Yes.
money for their suffering. And keep in mind, yes, like Danny Glover said one time, it makes the payoff feel good. But so he was not in favor of it, and I was just wondering, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think this is referred to as reparations. I have never, I hear a deal of talking, about the reparations, but there's a great fear, of course, that reparations means payment of money for the pain and suffering that you refer to. I have never heard of anyone, Black Americans, talk in terms of reparations in monetary terms. As I mentioned about education and health care, there are ways that some things can be done, and effort should certainly be put forth, but past due, for the standpoint of children who are not getting adequate education in order to compete in life and to earn decent livings and to be very productive citizens. And certainly access to health care. This report of last week, middle-aged men die twice, more likely to die twice the same number of white Americans. And if nothing more, the Navy owes me an apology. But you see, America will not apologize for slavery or any of the things that have been done. And there has to be something done this way, and I don't know why this cannot be touched upon. I think it's a fear of getting into paying money out or something. But I should have an apology from somebody. Black servicemen should have some kind of acknowledgement of what we did. The Japanese who were interned in camps during World War II, some were compensated for the inconvenience of those who were living. And the gentleman who brought forth a lawsuit back in 1944 that was upheld, the legality of the internment, but subsequently it was overturned. But he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Now, I wonder in terms of black servicemen who couldn't even go places where prisoners of war could go, aren't they entitled to some type of recognition or an apology, an acknowledgement that, look, you did something that was good for your country, and we want you to know how much we respect that. And we hear so much nowadays about democratic ideals, religious ideals, and American ideals, and all those nice, good kind of things, but where is some sense of principle and integrity? And I oftentimes think, hear the God Bless America, beautiful song, but I often think that I would ask all of you, when you hear the song or when you sing it, ask yourselves, what can we do to make America worthy of God's blessing? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
To our President's proposal on Social Security and how it may impact Black Americans.
Oh, I would not know much about that. Yeah, I think that Social Security is going to impact everyone, depending upon the age group and so on. I don't know if I'm talking in a selfish sense that all of this will come about maybe after I'm gone, and maybe that's too selfish on my part, but there is going to have to be something done, and I hope that it won't get to be some type of political football, and that time will get by before some people who are working will not be able to receive full benefits some kind of way. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious how you would address the visibility of Black Americans in today's society, especially pop culture versus prestigious positions. Basically, off the top of my head, the only two Black Americans I can think of that are extremely in a position of power in America right now are Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. I couldn't really name anyone else, but if you ask me about pop culture, I can name a variety of young Black guys who are promoting this image of this gangster style, you know, it's that I would consider detrimental to what most Black Americans are fighting for. How would you address that?
Well, so much of what you're speaking, certainly I agree with what you're saying in terms of these, the way this is, but so much of what we get into, as you say, that kind of culture, for one thing, it's a lack of good education. When you go into the idea of entertainment, or so many very wealthy young Black persons are entertainers. They sing, or they do something with a ball, bounce it, throw it, run to keep from being touched or whatever, or they're singers, but they're all entertainers, you see. And this is what appeals to America, and always has appealed to America, to have Black folk entertaining, and there's no kind of threat this way. But there have been Condoleezza Rice's before, Colin Powell's before, some like myself before, that didn't have the opportunities. And fortunately, that I include myself, I was prepared when opportunity did come along. And I made the most of it, as Colin Powell did, and Condoleezza Rice. But so often, this is all a lot of people know, that seem to feel that they're locked in. Some feel that there's only way to go is to go and do wrong things. This is from the Black side, Black, you might say, community or whatnot. And some see the basketball is on the way out. And you might say, in a sense, look at baseball, the number of Black players, number of white players, baseball, basketball, and football. But look at the announcers, the managers, the owners. There's always that break in there, and there has to be some reason for this. You have a disproportionate number of players as opposed to your commentators, your analysts, owners, managers, and so forth. There's a reason for that.
The cause, the fact that they are so visible, and that, well, like my mother, for example, you know, you would ask her, you know, what she would see something like this on TV. She would see a pop video, and she would just be horrified. She thinks that's so terrible. But it's the Black men that are making the video and doing that, so they're seen in that way.
Yes. Well, I can agree with what you're saying, but when you speak in terms of the cause is the responsibility of all of us. Certainly they have theirs, and I think they have more of a duty. If they're making some money, they can reach back and help others less fortunate in their communities and whatnot, and I totally agree with you. But there is a sense of that movement over there, or the Black cause. But there is no Black cause. This is America's cause, to make everything, make for a more fair and decent, honest society. And that's what we have to do first off, and sprinkle it out so that you just don't have all Black entertainers, and that you do have more Condoleezza Rices and Colin Powells. And this, you see, it can be done. But there's a reason that this comes out this way. And you see, the one thing that always, it appears to me, that troubles me is we keep talking about is this, they say, you know, the glass is half full, it's getting better. But where's the resistance coming from? No one could question the fact that over a period of time, generally things are better in terms of Black folk, say. But where does the resistance come from? when I was a child, as I indicated, I was all American. No black American. I really knew what America was about, but I haven't known that since. And so why is there this continuing resistance? And we have to sort of confront this. People concerned with America, we have to say to ourselves, as I just mentioned, is America worthy of God's blessing? In a simple, oversimplistic way, do we live truly the way that we profess to live? We profess these great ideals, and we do have them. They've kept me going all these years, and I believe in America. Go back to war, enlist again if a situation came about. But the idea is America should be true to itself. And I don't know when this will come about, and I don't know what it will take. I wish I did. But the points you raise, I agree with what you're saying in terms of the goodwill of what I would believe in. It doesn't help. As you're saying, your mother would. I would agree with your mother. But I'd like for your mother to see the total picture and what happened in the past. We have to know about what happened before, to what brings us to where we are. We have to see that what happened to bring us up to where we are. We just can't look at things as they are right now. And I'd like for most Americans to do that. There's a reason why we're here at this present state in our society, that what happened to bring us to where we are, how do we get here? Because any society that creates a problem should be able to solve it. And America has not shown that it is capable or willing, I should say, because let's face it, generally most Americans have not been inclined to favor equality. We have to face that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Where is the resistance?
That's what I wonder. Where does it come from? Because all the people that I know are good people. They would say so. I think it's stereotype, myths. Because where would anybody believe, well, this is in 1991, 92, I guess, this report came out from the University of Chicago, that said that black Americans are less patriotic. I read back in 1942, going into World War II, Americans believed that black Americans were as patriotic as anyone else. So what happened over the period of time? So somehow people had created this in their minds or in their thinking. Because if it's not one thing that's going to be found wrong with me, there's going to be something else. This has been my experience for many, many years. And it just shifts around, just depending. And we see it happen ever so often in different ways, but so often things come to the surface. But I really don't know. I run into so many nice, well-meaning people, and that's very disturbing. But yet they won't do what is required to be done, what is right to help make for a more fair and just society. I think it was Mohandas Gandhi who said that any changes that we would want to bring about in the world must begin with ourselves. I think that most Americans should think seriously that way. If they would be willing to see that there's some changes needed, and I don't know that many would be aware of the fact that changes are needed. Yes, sir.
Not quite sure how to put this, but it does seem to me that part of the problem, and I speak now as a white male American majority, part of the problem, part of the resistance, if you will, is that we are reluctant to realize that, or I am reluctant to realize, let me put it personally, that my place of privilege rests in part on oppression in the past. I mean, I'm the beneficiary of your ancestors' servitude. And if I apologize, or if I commit dollars to education to produce equality, if I act in this way, it's not the money out of my pocket, it's the loss of my self-image of a independent, I got where I am because of my efforts, when in fact, I didn't get here solely because of my efforts. I got here because of your efforts.
And
And I think that part of the resistance is a
Yes.
psychological resistance to recognizing our, that our place, my place, rests on others' labor.
well, that may be somewhat, I understand what you're saying, but there is this factor of white privilege that is not recognized. It is not taken into the equation. And it is there, and so often you say, well, I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I do this? They have every opportunity to do, but yet what brought us to where we are now is that type of privilege. I go back to my hometown, and some of the fellows who were in school with me, they did just as their fathers had done. My father couldn't work, get a decent job in the factory. We had to work in foundry, breathing and all and whatnot. And I couldn't get into the same, to go up if I wanted to do a general mother. They were very generous in offering me a job as a janitor in the factory. But the fellows who were my classmates went on to be executives with General Motors. Their fathers were executives in General Motors. But these fellows right now would say, well, I had the same equal type of situation with them, but they don't realize what their fathers had. And not necessarily based upon, slave labor, but just the benefits of being where they are because of their whiteness. And that is a big and a hard thing to deal with because, I worked hard. I did everything that I should. I mean, white fellows could say, in all fairness, that they did everything that was expected of them, but they're not acknowledging the edge that they had. I was heard. I don't know where it got this business, but it was equating race relations to a poker game. That here you have a black and a white guy at a poker game, playing poker for 300 years. The white guy stacked up a whole lot of stacks of money, cheating. And then one day he gets caught and he says, okay, I will not cheat no more. I won't cheat no more, and we'll start over, and we'll both start off with an even game. But what about all these stacks that he's got back here? And that's a little, I don't know, odd type of comparison, but it's sort of like a case that came up in federal court where a judge in Microsoft was facing a lawsuit, and Microsoft admitted that they had been wrong, and they wanted to start over and do what was right. And the judge said, hold it, wait a minute. We just can't say now that you will go forth and sin no more. You're going to have to do something. But that's the type of thing that I'm speaking about. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you think that out of fear of being politically correct, that some people are hesitant to criticize aspects of culture that might be causing problems?
Well, there is an idea of fear of criticizing, or we live in a society that's filled with fear. There's too much fear. We all know what is the right and fair thing to do. We stop and think about it. And either we're going to act on the basis of how we feel, in terms of our own principles and integrity, or we're not. And there's simply a failure not to do what is right. And as you say, to criticize or back and forth, that the criticism easily comes sometimes from those who profess some type of instant objectivity, who don't want to consider what led up to where we are. What happened to bring us to where we are? And someone had written, I think it was George Orwell or someone, who said that whoever controls the present controls history. Whoever controls history controls the present. And the control has always been the same way in America. Any other questions, please? Oh, yes, sir, way up there, all right.
Well, you talked about inequality in education and healthcare in America today along racial lines. Could you talk about the inequalities that we can see in the criminal justice system, with your experience in that area?
Well, much in the criminal justice system, I think the system itself, of course, needs a great deal of help overall, but the affluent aspect of justice based upon influence, black folk can pay for legal services, as we've seen in some recent cases. But yet you still find that the poor and the uneducated that don't have the representation, they still get an unfair shake. And of course, the criminal justice system has always been so deeply flawed in a racial way in terms of whether it's the judges or the prosecutors or the law enforcement officers in the streets. And I think that for the most part, that the justice system is getting more to the place that it treats all poor people badly. Black and the poor are pretty close involved in the same boat more and more. Of course, we hear about the racial profiling and those kinds of things. Did you want to speak to
I'd like
something?
to add something to that.
All
I'm a
right.
criminal lawyer, and I'm glad you asked that question. And it's a hard question to answer because a lot of people disagree about whether the justice system, how racist the justice system is.
Yes.
And let me just tell you the best way I could answer that, because I've been in it for 30 years. In this state, we developed sentencing guidelines for our judges. The reason for this, I was told by the governor herself when she was a state representative. She said that she voted for these sentencing guidelines because what she found out after the study was that not that the state was treating black defendants differently than white defendants. Judges weren't doing that. It's that violent defendants, the prisons were getting filled up with non-violent defendants, drug addicts, people who weren't committing violent crimes. And the guidelines were supposed to reserve the prisons for these violent people and keep the non-violent people in the community, that it wasn't a racial issue. The judges in Kansas just aren't racist, she said. Now let me compare that to this. I know a doctor who's a neurosurgeon. He's a black guy, but he's a very light-skinned black guy. And he's got a son who's very light-skinned. And sometimes people actually have trouble, who are thinking about race, figuring out what this boy is. Well, the doctor told me that one day in Topeka, he went into the hospital, into the doctor's room, where they all go, their breakout room, they sit down in the lounge. And a doctor he didn't know came up to him, this is a neurosurgeon, and said to him, only doctors are allowed in this room. And he just looked at him, and he got up and he walked out. The son, totally unrelated to this, told my son how he went to the Topeka Country Club because he was a tennis player. And he gets there and he plays tennis. And then some employee comes up to him and said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. And he says, why? Well, one of the members doesn't want you here. Now, when I heard this, you know what I thought? If this society is so racist, how can these judges claim that they don't treat people differently based on race?
Very true.
I
Yes.
don't believe it.
Yes. Yes. A very good point. But throughout our whole society, there is a racist concept that some years ago, of course, this is some years back, I conducted some hearings for a branch of federal government. It was assigned with the city for approximately 90 days. When I was prepared to leave, going back to Washington, the secretary, black young lady, very efficient, she came to me, tears in her eyes. I was the hearing officer, and told me how much she appreciated what I had done. And I didn't know what she was talking about. And she told me that I was responsible for her getting an increased grade in that office, because the lady who would have been assigned to me to do my work had refused to work for a black man. The office personnel, and I understand that there's some discussion even all the way back to Washington. As a result, they increased the grade level of this black girl so she could work for me. But they went along with this white young lady, and if I had said, I'm not going to have a white secretary, I'd have been out walking on the street. And I was the hearing officer in charge of running this kind of thing, especially aside from Washington. But I was reminded of my great uncle Bass Reeves, way back in 1870. He seeking out what they call a posse, man, someone to help him, assist him in his work. He could appoint those people. And the gentleman told him that he wouldn't work for him because he couldn't see himself working for a black man. But here we are, 100 years later, the same situation that I'm faced with, except now the federal government is sanctioning this kind of conduct from a secretary who says she's not going to work for this a black hearing officer. And she got away with it. Fortunately, it meant that this black young lady got a promotion, and she's thanking me. I guess she thought I knew about it or something, and I didn't. But I didn't take the cause up because I didn't want any kind of problems coming to her, because she should have had the best kind of rating in any case. But these kinds of things happen very often in government, in private industry, all the time. There's no question about it. The racist concept just continues to exist. And somehow the government often feeds into this. Our officials are the ones most guilty, I'm afraid. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Despite the sort of cultural stereotypes that associate African Americans with crime, I mean, statistically, the vast majority of black people do not commit crimes. Although sometimes I wonder why. I mean, if the law doesn't respect you, why would you respect the law? I was wondering, in your experience, if you've had any thoughts on how racism in the system affects the decision-making of people that wind up in the criminal justice system.
Well, we read all the time about the different statistics showing that for the similar crimes, black defendants receive more time than white, similar crimes, similar background, education, and whatnot. And this happens all the time, and this is pretty much standard. As in different judgments in civil suits, you get a less amount of money if you're black, and it goes all the way up and down the line. And this is just the way that this is. I recall there was a judge, a black judge I was talking to in New York, and he told me that he, under oath, there was a special prosecutor, investigator for the prosecutor's office, this was a few years back. He testified under oath that he was ordered to get a black judge. Whatever it took to get something on a black judge, just to get a judge out of there. And sometimes we hear some black elected officials say that they're out to get them and back and forth, and people don't pay much attention. You wonder whether there's a validity to it, but this was something that was a matter of, that was under oath. And so these kinds of things do happen. It occurs. And I remember a few years ago, perhaps you recall the Susan Smith case there in the Carolinas, north of South Carolina, where the young lady said that the black guy had drowned her children. And during that period, there were several instances where different people, all they have to do is say, a black guy did it. And then they head to the streets and pick up black guys and back and forth. And to some youngsters today I was speaking about, I used to, as I was working in my office, not traveling with cases, I'd always go to the office very early in the morning. And I've been stopped many, many times by police officers. Assume if I work driving, stop at a stoplight, have a jacket and tie, that I've been out all night, and I'm just coming in, and there must be some liquor on my breath, and maybe I'm maybe I'm somebody, and they can nail me. Never have their badges on, never have an ID, but they always stop for traffic, you know. And why did you do some kind of frivolous thing that didn't make any sense? But I've been stopped a number of times. I always ask them for their badge number or their names, and they're gone. But this type of harassment and this goes on. It's just something that many people don't experience and many people would not be aware of, but it occurs. Yes.
Do you think that sort of unfair treatment has some influence on, minorities who do commit crimes feeling that?
Well, there is a yes. Yeah, I think you have. I believe that there is something to that, because if you lose faith in it, you just don't respect it. And I try to spend a considerable amount of my time teaching young people to respect the law. There is a reference to my great uncle. I have formed a foundation, the Vassar's Educational Foundation, to go into the schools and to help teach our young people to respect the law, the importance of obeying the law, then do whatever else can happen. But to do what the law requires, help them to understand more about the law. A lot of youngsters don't know that the law is to protect them. And then, maybe they're innocent, they start running. Here comes the law. The first thing they start doing is running, and then they get more and more into some problems. They look so guilty, and they don't. They just want to get away, because the law to many people, as I mentioned in my own personal experience, it's not a nice kind of thing in many instances. Yes, sir.
Going back to the workforce and such, I was wondering how you feel on affirmative action and companies maybe hiring to fill the quota and such. And with me personally, if I'm about to graduate or whatever and go into the workforce, am I supposed to feel privileged in order, if I have the upper hand, just being a minority myself, or should we minorities feel guilty for taking that opportunity given to us just because we're a minority, or do you think affirmative action is going into the wrong direction as far as being considered filling the quota, or I just want to know how you feel on that?
Well, I think, of course, there's a lot of the different labels, affirmative action, whatever it is. I always like to think that there should certainly be some concerted effort to do what is fair. I like to use the term justice, to do justice. But I suppose, in the sense that you're speaking, I have been a beneficiary of affirmative action. There was affirmative action taken by the federal government to do what was right, to bring in black attorneys into a place where they had never been before. Now, I have strong feelings about young people who feel that somehow they are guilty or allow some other people to say, you wouldn't be here if it weren't for affirmative action. You must believe in yourself. You must be prepared. And don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong there. You can do the same thing back to them. That I have as much business being here as you do. You may not be qualified to be here yourself. Do it in a nice way. You say, but do it in a nice way. There's a good you get some gratification of being nice and without showing your hostility, your total anger. But just believe, make sure you believe in yourself, and do what it is that you're assigned to do. Do your job, do it well, and if possible, do it a little bit better, and to be sure and get to work on time. Yes, ma'am.
I have questions for you, and then I want to tell this young man something, is that the law for affirmative action expressly forbids quotas. If you get that job, it's because of your qualifications and because of who and what you are, not because of affirmative action and quotas. So I don't know whether that helps you or not, but...
Well, like, I was, like, like we talked about in several classes, how if I was to go in with, like, my buddy here, and we're equally qualified, and, you know, it's a majority white firm or something, you know, even though we're both qualified, I might have that upper hand just because I am a minority. You know, I mean, even though no one would say it, you know, maybe, you know, once we leave or something, you know, maybe we'll notice it. It might just be one of those things.
But if you're equally qualified and it's a majority white firm, where's the privilege? You know what I mean? That, you know, so I mean, there's. But I just wanted you to know when people are talking about quotas that those are expressly forbidden, you know, with that law. So it's not that they say, you know, you have, you know, the next person that comes in that's black or Hispanic or whatever we're going to hire to meet our affirmative action. That's not going to happen. So.
I mean, well, don't you think that sometimes, I mean, it still happens regardless if it's forbidden or not, you know, I mean, just under the table. I'm sure they're not going to tell me that, but deep down inside, you know, everyone's thinking of something, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Anyway, I'll talk to you in a minute. You've talked about how things haven't changed a lot, and you've talked about some almost insurmountable obstacles that you've been able to overcome and a great deal of success that you have achieved. What would you like to leave as your legacy?
The legacy? Oh, gee, I don't know. I never thought much about that. I've been too busy. Try to overcome obstacles, I guess. But it'd be very difficult for me to say. The one thing that I feel strongly about is justice. I have a big thing about justice, fairness, that I want to do what is just and fair, and being good to people. I was telling the young people this afternoon, don't go trusting everybody. You trust those people who have shown to you that they're trustworthy. And as the young man mentions, he might be feeling guilty about his buddy, but will your buddy be feeling guilty about you if it is reversed? But otherwise, both of you all can pull yourselves out of the race and let somebody go in there and say, well, I'm glad to be here and I'm entitled to the job and thank you and I'm happy to be here. You fellas could be out there debating this thing out, but someone's going to have to win and someone's going to have to lose. And you see, if you know that you are worthy of that job, tell your friend, I'm sorry, I'll see if I can get you in, but I got to go. And you tell him the same thing if you felt the same way, that we're all in here together and you're a nice guy and I like you, but I got to go ahead and do this job. And don't look back. You're going to struggle about what, you know. I remember years ago, I had a dream about my buddy. It was a strange dream. A dream that I was playing baseball, and I was playing second base. And a real good friend of mine was running from first to second base. And someone threw me the ball, and here I'm getting ready to tag him out. Here's my real good buddy, and I hated to do it. But, you know, the rascal has to be put out. So sometimes you have to go ahead and do what has to be done under the circumstances. And one of the two of you all, and it's certainly not to feel guilty. I was reading not too long ago, there's a Hispanic lady who is a writer, and I hear this oftentimes about young black folk, that they don't want to be thought of as being a good, in her case, she didn't want to be thought of as a good Hispanic writer. She wanted to be a good writer. And she didn't want to be thought of that way. But I would say to her, know that you're a good writer. You can't be concerned about what these people are doing. If you got the job, just do that good job that I spoke about a minute ago, and do it well, and it'll clear itself all up. You can't worry about what the other guy's thinking about. Just be good at what you're doing. And maybe you do a good enough job where you are, you might be able to pull your buddy in. Unless he's had it with you and you don't have anything more to do with you, your friendship is shot. But there's ways that you can do to pull those kinds of things out. But don't let people make you feel guilty that you got something, because maybe they're not entitled to be where they are either. And I think this is true in many instances because of this privilege that we were speaking about earlier.
I think we're going to give you a break now.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. I'm really glad to be here. I really enjoy being able to participate with the students and all of you, as a matter of fact. And I hope that you talk about the legacy, that somehow I've helped. That people say sometimes, well, that I made a change, or I made a difference. But if I can sort of help somebody, I think some of the students that I speak with today, I think that they perhaps they learned something, just from the way that I went about trying to talk to them, that they would understand, and that makes me feel very good. Because I don't have a whole lot of faith in people after all these years, though I never lose my feeling of kindness and generosity when I can. But I think it was, I forget the philosopher, but he said that he loved mankind, but he just couldn't stand people. but
Isn't that Rousseau? Well, I think there might be some Paul Bradys out there.
Well, there might be.
You don't know.
I have some communication going on here somehow. But good luck in any case. And to the students, hang in there and work hard. And always do the right thing. And because you may feel discouraged, or things go rough with you, we've been through all of that same kind of thing before. Everyone has gone through it, so don't think you're alone. And work real hard. You'll get a break somewhere along the line. And I guess that's one of the things I can stand here before you, that I never thought that I would ever be a judge, maybe at some point maybe even a lawyer, but kept plugging away and didn't give up, and the break, so to speak, came my way, and I'm very appreciative, very thankful. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.